everybody, how's it going? This is Eden Mabon of LightCycleAstrology.com. Welcome back to the channel, friends. Today we are doing horoscopes for all 12 rising signs for the total solar eclipse that is coming through tonight or tomorrow morning, depending on where you are on the planet. But this is a very powerful total solar eclipse that is in square to the planet Pluto, happening at the last degree of the sign of Aries. And as the eclipse is happening, the sun enters the sign of Taurus, where she was said to be exalted in ancient astrology. So this is a very powerful, incredible solar eclipse. And what we're going to do is read that in your particular birth chart, and we can do that based on whatever sign was rising at the time of your birth. So we're going to go through all 12 rising signs and take a look at some of the themes for this solar eclipse, or some of the potential meanings based on those particular house topics that it lands in whichever house it does land in your birth chart. Okay, now before we get into today's content, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave some comments in the comment section. All those things help to push the channel forward. And I have been really enjoying some of the comments that people have been leaving. So thank you so much to all the commenters. It's always really helpful, and it just brings a lot of joy to see how the astrology is actually showing up for people out there in the world, because I don't have a two-way street like I normally would if I was sitting in front of a person I was reading for. So that's always really great to get those. You just have to leave your rising sign and tell me a little bit about what's happening. Okay, so let's go ahead and get right into it. Now, first of all, let's talk about the meaning of a solar eclipse just in general, because this is something that we're going to want to keep in mind as we go through the horoscopes for all 12 rising signs. So in the broad, in traditional astrology, solar eclipses are read as omens that portend important changes to life direction, life story, life purpose, life ideals, and sometimes physical vitality, all things related to the natural significations of the sun. So we're talking about solar things. So remember that a solar eclipse is basically it's a new moon when the moon passes in front of the sun and blocks out the light of the sun for a few hours. So if you think about that from the standpoint of a kind of omen, anything related to the sun was said to be almost kind of shut off for a moment, or there was a dramatic change that happened, right? Because normally the sun doesn't have anything cover it up. So it's an important omen that gets at some kind of change in anything that relates to solar symbolism. Sometimes that is physical vitality, because it was believed by the ancient peoples that there's a connection between light and spirit and the sun, with that essence that animates the material body. So sometimes, in general, eclipses can have an effect on health, to the physical vitality. Normally, though, it's usually about the kind of purpose or ideal that is a kind of image. You know, it's almost like an inspirational ideal or image in our minds about what is bringing meaning to our lives. So sometimes eclipses can bring about a dramatic or important change to the kind of purpose or meaning that we are trying to install in our lives. So let's say, for instance, somebody is on path to become like a lawyer or something like that. Well, this can be a kind of aspect that can symbolically represent a period of time where maybe somebody decides to change their mind about that. So about a life meaning, a life purpose, a life ideal, those are all connected to solar symbolism. So that's important to keep in mind in terms of when looking at an eclipse, in particular in your birth chart. We want to take a look at, what are some of the ways in which there might be an important change in the storyline or in those particular house topics. What's something that could be changing or shifting around those particular house topics that is kind of like a twist almost in like a movie plot. Now, for this particular solar eclipse, though, some of the themes that seemed to resonate or stand out for me was one theme I'm calling sacrifice for prosperity. And how I got at that meaning, again, we talked about that in Monday's video, but sacrifice, because we're talking about this eclipse taking place in a Mars-ruled sign. but which is actually transitioning into a Venus-ruled sign, so from Aries into Taurus. So you get the sense that there is Mars handing off solar things to Venus, and or really, it's a solar Mars that is handing off exaltation power to a lunar Venus. So you could get maybe some sacrifice and prosperity, as it were, just in general, for maybe a theme for a particular solar eclipse, and then you maybe combine that with a twist or change in a plot or a story or ideal that maybe is being connected to that. So those are some of the ways that we're going to read this particular solar eclipse through the 12 rising signs. Okay, now let's go ahead and pull up the real-time clock. And we'll start with Aries on the ascendant here. And I have taken everything out of the chart just except for Pluto and the sun and the moon, so that it's real clear to see this. But if you are in Aries rising, this is going to be happening across your first whole sign house and moving into your second whole sign house. So this eclipse in square to Pluto is going to be in your 11th whole sign house. But in general, we're talking about the eclipse itself sort of beginning at that very last section of your first house and moving into your second house. So what are some of the ways we could read this? Well, the things that come to mind is dealing with physical vitality issues that perhaps leads you to invest in yourself, for instance, because we're talking about the eclipse beginning in the house that has to do with the physical body or vitality itself. So that's really interesting. There's like a double meaning there for Aries risings, because a solar eclipse has a connection to physical vitality, and so does the first house. So for some Aries risings, this could be read as maybe dealing with something physical or health-wise, and because it moves into that second house that has a connection with money or personal belongings or personal investment, the ways in which you tend to invest in things in your life. You could read that as, are there going to be things that you invest in for yourself personally? So now this doesn't have to be about something health or physical. It could be about maybe imagining yourself as a kind of person and saying, oh, I could see myself being this kind of person, but I've got to drop some cash on that to actually make it happen. I have to invest in something in some way to make it happen. So that is where the eclipse is taking place for Aries rising. So another possibility I could see is just having a profound change in self-image or identity. Like an identity change that has some kind of impact on your finances, making money or investing skills, right? So could something be shifting or changing in the way that you identify yourself, or do you see yourself in kind of a new light? Is something changing or shifting over the next couple of months around how you see yourself? And that somehow connects to the ways in which you earn money, save money, invest money, the things that you have, the things that you tend to plant the seeds for yourself to grow things for the future for yourself, in other words. So that is where the energy is really taking place for Aries risings. Now, it does have that square aspect to Pluto. So as you begin to change something about yourself, maybe invest in something about yourself, are you going to encounter some power struggles with other people out there who know you, like friends or associates at work or something like this? There is some kind of sign where you may encounter difficulty from people as you try to shift something about yourself. So that's what I have for Aries rising. Now let's go ahead and put Taurus on the ascendant, and this is going to be another really powerful indicator for things that are connected very personally. We have the eclipse taking place at that very last degree on the edge of the 12th house, and the moon is going to transition into the first house and become exalted. And then that square is leading back to Pluto in the 10th house of career. So again, this is kind of a personal one here, but there's definitely some kind of personal rebirth or maybe a recovery with the mind or body that is in process. This might be a time when it feels easier to be yourself or to integrate a new part of yourself, or there might be a new exploration of some kind of a kind of personal journey. This may also be about giving up or getting away from that which trips you up, makes you unhealthy, etc. And that's because we see this connection with the eclipse beginning in the 12th house. So definitely this is a transition where something is shifting or changing around personal identity, physical vitality, self-image, self-integration. And there may have been some work that you've been doing on yourself over the last, year or so, or however long, that is now going to be integrated into your personal image. Now, this does have a square aspect to Pluto back in the 10th house. So again, it's like you might see some professional challenges coming from the world writ large. So maybe coming from your work or your boss or your career, something about that is tense, and there may be a little bit of a challenge or power struggle that you have to meet in order to fully integrate the new aspects of yourself. So that's an interesting dynamic. So that's something that you can play with, is how are you changing, and how does that relate to your professional ambitions or your professional work that you do on a day-to-day, the activity or practice that you have in the world, the ways in which you are reputable in the world comes to mind as well. And could there be some challenges? Sometimes the world doesn't like when we change. So for instance, what if you see yourself as doing something different, and this of course is going to affect your career, right? Maybe you have a change in career at this time. Now remember that eclipses tend to have this stretch of time where they can be happening before the eclipse happens, and they can be happening after the eclipse happens. So, some people give it like a 6 months before, or 2 weeks before, 6 months after, 2 weeks after. There's kind of a weird time thing with eclipses. So read this as a moment where this is just the general time period in which some of these things can be read, but it definitely has something to do with integrating something or changing something about you personally that you may have to contend. There may be a challenge or something that changes or shifts that has a real powerful impact on your career or reputation out in the world. So that's how I would read that for Taurus risings. Okay, now let's go ahead and put Gemini on the ascendant. This is going to bring this eclipse to the edge of the 11th house that crosses into the 12th house. So powerful shifts in the plot or personal image of life direction that shifts around the topics of who you associate your friend groups or your social networks out there, maybe your professional networks, and how this is shifting into the 12th house, a place that was said to be more isolated, that had to do with hospitals or recovery or even things that lead astray. Now, this is an interesting combination because the moon moves into exaltation. So this is an interesting combination where you have the moon moving into a difficult house, but it's moving into a sign that exalts it and is said to be a place where lunar things are lifted up to in some kind of good fortune. So how do you get good fortune, but sort of in a way that might bring unhealthy or secretive or detrimental things to you? Well, you sort of get that maybe it's like somebody that decides that they want to maybe be a little less social and they're going to be more on their own. But even though it's real enjoyable and they get a lot out of it, it's like, I guess you can just indulge too much in a particular way. So this could be a way in which maybe you get too indulgent with something that seems good or has like a real pleasurable appeal to it. That's one thing that I could see. But there is some shift around being kind of social or out there in the world, maybe around personal goals or aspirations, that seems to shift into more of a private or personal space that's more reflective or spiritual, and that which has some kind of pleasurable appeal to it. Now, the square energy back to Pluto in the ninth, it's like Pluto is saying, I'm here to begin to transform some philosophical underpinnings or some overarching philosophical understanding that you have held, in the past, right? Pluto's going to come into the ninth house of philosophy and say, well, I don't know, is this really what you should believe in? So there are these dynamics sort of coming in with the topics of personal understanding or belief, how you fit into maybe your friend groups and how you need time on your own. These are all questions that are going to be big questions essentially going forward over the next couple of months, I would think. So that's how I would read that for Gemini rising. Now let's go ahead and put Cancer on the ascendant. This is going to move the eclipse moving across the cusp of the 10th into the 11th, making that square back to Pluto in the 8th house. So this one is really interesting. One of the things that is coming up for me just from my intuition, because the 11th house from a traditional standpoint had this kind of connection to the king's resources. So when we talk about sacrifice, the 10th house sort of had this connection to success, and we have the sun here getting eclipsed. So it's almost like you could make a story out of this. There's like an exalted king that loses power or has to give power up through some kind of fate. And this connects to the resources of his kingdom with this particular one. So this makes me wonder if the moon moving into the 11th house has something to do with you transitioning away from some kind of personal ambition, or, it's like there's a change in the plot. It's like I wanted to have this for myself career-wise. I wanted to move up the ladder this way, or have this business, be this person professionally. And it's like something about that might be sacrificed. And what happens is it's sacrificed to make room for maybe handling more social networks that have a connection with the resources of organizations or of friends or of people. There's this interesting connection for me that gets at the resources of powerful institutions, the king's money or the money of the kingdom itself, because the sun was said to be exalted in Aries, and it's getting co-opted by the moon. The moon is sort of taking something from the sun and bringing it into the 11th. So it's like there's kind of a career sacrifice or a reputational sacrifice. And then good things are coming for the moon in the 11th that speaks to maybe dealing with resources or assets or accumulating opportunities for yourself that are actually still good. So this one kind of is just more of a shift in the outer world sphere in one way or another that has a kind of a social or networking dynamic to it. Now, of course, this could be like, for instance, maybe somebody that joins an organization, like, somebody that decides to join a church or an athletic club or something like this. So it could simply be something like that, where you join a new group and maybe you have to make time for that in your career. And there is this interesting square from the eclipse back to Pluto in the 8th house. So how do the changes that is happening for you out in the world with career or with social dynamics or groups or people or associations, or maybe even personal aspirations for career that are changing, how does all of that connect to something that is transforming in the 8th house that has a connection with death, sometimes with inheritance, with the resources of our partner or shared resources, or about how people depend on us or how we depend on people? This place in the 8th house, there is tension and challenge coming from that. As something professionally or worldly is changing for us, there is a sort of transition for what is expected of us by other people or what we expect from other people. This could be a moment where the resources of a partner are coming to an end and we need to depend on ourselves. And this maybe is where the tension is coming from that makes us want to change something about our professional life. So you get the sense that there is a connection to the shared resources of others, maybe a death or like it could even be like a metaphorical death, some kind of anxiety that is coming up now, some mental anxiety that you have to deal with about changing something professionally. So these are sort of the house topics that we're playing with. I'm kind of all over the board with this one, but I'm just kind of trying to remember all of these significations for these particular houses. So this one is a really interesting one. So if you are a Cancer rising, I would love to see how this actually seems to show up for you, with these topics of the 10th house, the 11th house, and the 8th house. Okay, let's go ahead and move the chart to Leo and put Leo on the ascendant here. And this is going to move the eclipse that is happening across the 9th house cusp on into the 10th house, and which is making that square back to Pluto in the 7th house. So this one very much strikes me as a transition or a turning in this storyline or plot line where maybe you have finished up getting some kind of higher education or degree, but the 9th house is this place where we connect to higher learning, or we connect to higher spiritual, connection, like say religion or philosophy, or this connection that we have to spiritual things like a church or God. But it can also be about law, so certain people that are in Congress will have strong 9th house placements because they govern the world. And you see that because the 9th house is neighbors to the 10th house, and the 10th house has always been associated with the world. So there is something transitioning in this very important house that has a philosophical connection, a connection to higher learning, a connection to universities or institutions of religion or academia, or maybe even science. So what is happening is it's as if something is changing or shifting around the area of learning or higher understanding, philosophy, principles. It's like somebody gets a degree and then they take that degree out into the world as the moon moves into the 10th house of career, and a house that was called praxis, a place where we put into action ideals or things that we know. So the 9th house connected to things that we know on like a higher level, moving into the 10th house, practicing things that we know or doing things with what we know, putting those things into use, manifesting the knowledge into something tangible. That's where you see something shifting or changing. So for instance, I'll give an example that's probably not very common, but you could see like somebody that has gone through like a seminary program. And this might be a moment where they decide to take that leap of faith, pun intended, and open up their own church. Or maybe it's a lawyer who has been studying to pass the bar and is going to finally open up their own law practice or join a firm or something like that. So, you get that kind of a sense. Now, this square back to Pluto in Aquarius, something around partnership or even like business partnership is shifting or changing. There's a transition that may bring a certain level of difficulty or challenge or power struggle, maybe coming from a marriage partner or maybe even an opponent that you're going to have to deal with. But the 7th house having a connection to, relationships, there could be some tension coming from a relationship. Another thing that the 7th house was connected to was with things that come to completion. So is Pluto coming in here and saying, you're done? This thing that you have been working on or learning about, it's done. It can't keep going. Something has to change. So I wonder if for some Leo risings, could this simply be a time where there has been a prolonged period of learning? Maybe a young person that has been at university for a long time, and now Pluto is saying, it's done. It's over. It's time to get out in the world and do it. The time for just languishing in the university is over. So you get that kind of a sense that there's something that is either being represented by Pluto in the seventh that says something is being finished or completed, or it might connect to partners or relationships, people that are really important in your life, and maybe they are affected by how you're changing professionally, or becoming more visible in the world, or bringing those transitions of yourself out into the public. So that is how I would read for Leo rising people. Okay, now let's go ahead and put Virgo on the ascendant here. Okay, so for Virgo rising, this eclipse is happening across the 8th house cusp and is moving into the 9th house. So this is interesting. This is almost like the flip side for Leo rising people, where for Leo rising, what it was is there seemed to be a period of some kind of higher or spiritual learning that had been taking place, where there was this time sort of almost outside of the world, and the learning that happens in that sort of meditative or in that learning space now needs to be brought into the material world somehow, into some tangible practice or work. And this is almost the flip side of that, where you can see the eclipse is happening in the 8th house of shared resources, of loans, of support that we receive from other people. You get the sense that something is changing or shifting around the kind of support that we get, whether that's getting a new loan that gives us some money to go back to school, or whether that's something shifting or changing that is no longer there in terms of support from some other source, from a bank or from a marriage partner or something like that. Something is shifting or changing in the areas that we depend on other people. And that is causing a move into this 9th house that is going to stimulate higher learning or higher education, or getting degrees, or moving into more of a meditative or philosophical place where maybe we write or we publish. So you get the sense that there's connection with things shifting or changing around that which we depend on. In certain cases, I wonder if this isn't like, for some Virgo risings, this could be that there is an inheritance that comes through, maybe from a death of, somebody in the family or something like that. And that which gives us some kind of money that we can do something with. And we maybe even donate that to a religious or spiritual charity. There could be many ways in which you could read this, but you sort of have to combine this 8th house topical signification of the sharing of resources or assets that we depend on, or that we provide to other people as well, that somehow has a connection to higher learning, higher education, getting degrees, entering programs, joining seminary, becoming religious, joining churches, things like that are in play here. Now, this square back to Pluto in the 6th house is also interesting, because Pluto represents in the 6th some kind of transition or transformation about the ways that we work very hard on things. The kind of laborious tasks that are never ending. It's almost like the ways that we have to become a slave and work on things endlessly. Those are shifting and changing. So as Pluto has recently entered this house, it's almost like Pluto is saying, you have always worked very hard in this particular way on these particular kinds of jobs or projects or something like this. And that has always been there. Pluto is almost saying there's going to be a change in the way that you work, or in the place that you work, or in the kinds of work that you do. It's still going to be hard, but it's going to go from one kind of work or one area of job to something different. That's how I would read that. And that's where the tension is coming from. So, could it simply be that it's like, you used to have these kinds of jobs, and now there is a form of support, like a form of support that used to provide you some kind of asset or resources, maybe coming from a marriage partner or a husband or an ex-husband or something like that, that is shifting or changing. And this, propels somebody to say, maybe I ought to get this degree or that degree and change the way that I that I work. That is very possible, I could think, for Virgo rising people. So this is an interesting one. But again, if you're Virgo rising, go ahead and tell me in the comments section, I'm Virgo rising and this is sort of what's going on. That would be really helpful. Okay, now let's go ahead and move the chart to put Libra on the ascendant, and we're halfway done with Libra here. This is going to take the eclipse that is basically happening across the 7th house on into the 8th house symbolically here, and which is making that square back to Pluto in the 5th house. So for Libra rising, this definitely strikes me as something ending, something being finalized or consecrated in your life, a big shift in change in either a marriage or partnership or relationship, business partnership that is either becoming more solidified in, like, it moves up in a level where, like, for instance, people deciding to get married and joining their resources together because the action is moving across into the 8th house of shared resources. So for instance, maybe certain people could decide, hey, let's get married and join our assets together, split the bills. That could be something that we see. And let's do it because, there's, we're pregnant now, Pluto in the 5th. There's something that is giving pressure to that. So that's one scenario that you could see, but this could also be, of course, when we have the 7th house, this could also be a change in, for some Libra risings, maybe people could be splitting up or getting divorces, and that is going to be read then as the eclipse moving into the 8th, and now there is a splitting of the marital assets. So you could see it go either way here. Now, I don't want to freak anybody out. If you have an eclipse in the 7th house and your relationship is going fine, don't worry. But there's some shift in the topics of partnership or relationship that is kind of a dramatic change that is happening over, maybe potentially the next 6 months, that will have an impact on how you guys share those combined resources or pay for those combined bills or something like that. So it doesn't have to be scary. It just might mean, we decide to buy a minivan for our children because we have, our car breaks down and we need to drive our children around. And, maybe it's like, where's the money going to come from? Well, let's each, chip in, work some more hours at work, or, something like that. Now, one possibility I could see here, going with the theme of sacrifice and prosperity that we talked about at the beginning, I wonder if a partner isn't going to sacrifice himself, maybe work those longer hours to provide more resources that can help the children or something like that, right? You get the sense that there's maybe like something creative or something connected to the children that maybe our partner might have to work a little bit harder on, maybe change jobs. Maybe this affects the shared resources of the relationship or the family. Something around these kind of topics I would sort of look at for Libra risings. Okay, now let's go ahead and put Scorpio on the ascendant, my own personal rising sign. This is going to shift the eclipse that is moving across the 6th house into the 7th house, and which is making that square to Pluto back in the 4th house of home and family. So this is a pretty angular place to have an eclipse, pretty powerful, but essentially it begins in the 6th house of work and labor and sacrifice. So I get the feeling that it's as if there is it's as if maybe, okay, here's a couple of possibilities. It could be that something we've been working really, really hard at is coming to completion with that eclipse moving into the 7th house of things that become finalized or finished or completed or consecrated. It could be that there was something we've been working on that is finally, coming to an end and we can complete it. That's one way in which you could read that. It could also be, though, that there is like a sacrifice of work, that you have to work very, very hard at something. Maybe there's a change in job, or there's a change in the kind of work you're doing, or maybe there's just a change in how much you have to work. And you're doing that because you need to bring prosperity to the marriage or to the relationship. That's also another way in which you could read that. And there's this square back to Pluto. there is something that is transforming with Pluto having recently entered the fourth house of home and family in Aquarius there. It's like something is transforming in the home or family, and there needs to be more prosperity in the relationship. So, I guess for some people, maybe this is certain Scorpio risings maybe are meeting people at work, and there is the beginning of a new relationship, and maybe over the next 6 months, this new person that you're dating is coming over to your house a lot, and that's shifting and changing things in the house. Could be something like that, but it could also be for people that are already married, and it's like you have to work harder to provide for the family, to provide for the marriage or the home or something like that. I guess if it doesn't have anything to do with a relationship or meeting somebody, entering a new relationship or anything on that level, for some Scorpio risings, could it be just simply going back to that theme of sacrificing something that you work on in order to maybe just be more social, bring things to completion, a change of jobs or work that is somehow more enjoyable or pleasurable, maybe even going on a trip or doing some traveling, living abroad, moving to a place overseas. These are also some of the ways in which you might read this. And that's because the seventh house was a place associated with living abroad. So this connection back to Pluto in the fourth, you get the sense that for some Scorpio risings, maybe that's a possibility. Okay, let's go ahead and move Sagittarius to the rising sign here over in the first house, which is going to place this action of the eclipse moving across the fifth house boundary into the sixth house boundary, making that square back to Pluto in the third. So if you are a Sag rising, this is really interesting, but this one strikes me as, a sacrifice that we have to make for our children or a creative area in our life that basically leads to more work. I hate to just make it so simple and emphatic, but with the moon moving into the sixth house, a place that was the joy of Mars itself, and the eclipse beginning in a sign that was a Mars ruled sign here in Aries, it's like you really see that theme moving across from something creative. How do we recreate ourselves through art, through pleasure, through recreation, through having children? What are those creative ways that we reproduce our own self, our own image? Because the fifth house has a whole sign trine aspect to the first house of self. So that trine aspect, trines were said to be of the nature of Jupiter, and Jupiter was a planet connected with abundance and fertility. So that's one of the ways in which we ascribe meaning to the fifth house, is recreating ourselves. So what are the ways that we are recreating ourselves that are either coming to an end, we're sacrificing, or there's some kind of new beginning, perhaps, in ways in which we recreate ourselves, like having a new child or starting a new creative project or endeavor. And something is going to take a lot of work, a lot of sacrifice. That's the way I would read that. And I think that Pluto in the third house here reads as obviously the everyday routines that we are used to are going to be transforming or shifting or changing, right? So there's some way in which, those routines that we've had over the last 20 years are really going to be moving into a new dynamic as we have to work on the ways in which we reproduce ourselves, whether that's with children or it could even be, ways that we enjoy activity, play sports with friends or just have fun. That's one thing that could also change, your daily routine. So this could be a time where I guess one way you'd have to be a little bit careful if you're a Sag rising is with things moving into the abundance sign, right? The moon moving into exaltation, a place that was abundant, Taurus here, but in a bad house where sometimes overindulgence can cause illness or injury, so you do have to be careful here that things aren't being led from the standpoint of having so much of a focus on what brings pleasure or indulgence or fun or something that is enjoyable that sort of leads to maybe something that's not so healthy, and getting in a long-term, like habitual everyday habit of doing that, having it like an abundance of something that was good, but that sort of led to something not so healthy, like drinking too much. So I guess that's one caveat for Sag risings, is you have to be careful about what leads maybe to things that aren't so healthy that seem like they're really good or pleasurable. But I think in general, this is really about maybe children or a creative project that we're going to be starting that is going to be taking a lot of effort and work, and it's going to be shifting something over the next 20 years in terms of how we are doing things on a day-to-day basis, in terms of like a daily routine or a commute, or maybe a place that we live. This could be a place where we move to a new city, work on a new project, something like that. Okay, let's go ahead and put Capricorn on the ascendant. Okay, so for Capricorn rising, this eclipse is basically happening across the fourth house cusp, and it enters into the fifth house as it is ongoing. And it is also making that square back to Pluto in the second house. So if you're a Capricorn rising, this is really, really interesting. I wonder if there isn't a change, a big kind of plot or storyline change in the home or family. For certain Capricorn risings, it's like something really dramatic changes in the home or family that leads potentially to having more fun or enjoying your life to some degree. That wasn't, having an enjoyment that wasn't there maybe before. And it might take a sacrifice. So I wonder, for some people, it's like, do you move to a new city and your living situation changes, but now you're like near nature, and you get to go out and walk in nature, or bring the children out in nature, something like that, a change in where you live, maybe moving into a new place or moving out of a place, maybe even for some people, this could be leaving home, or um, leaving a marriage where you move places or something like that. But there is this sense in which there's something that really changes or shifts around where you live, or what's happening at home, what's happening with the family. And it leads to more enjoyment or recreational time. And there is this tension back with Pluto in the second house. So there are big transformations that are going to be taking place over the next 20 years with the ways in which you invest money, what you have possessionally, your skills, your ability to earn money, the investments that you make. All of those financial things for you personally are beginning to shift. And this has some kind of connection to the fifth house. So it makes me wonder if, you have children, begin a new creative project, and that takes some finances that is maybe bringing a little tension into your life. But definitely around the topics of where you're living. Are you moving? Are you staying? Are you renovating? Are you moving out of a family situation? One thing that we could see with Capricorn risings for some people is sometimes there could be a death in the family. And you could read this as getting an inheritance that gives you some money, that gives you the ability to do something that you've always wanted to do. So for certain Capricorn risings, I wonder if some people won't have that kind of an experience. And if you do, my condolences. But sometimes with an eclipse, we do see the theme of death come through, especially in the fourth house like this, in a Mars ruled sign. So hopefully not. But if something like that does happen, it seems like the omen is like it provides some kind of wealth or prosperity or good fortune from that. So that is interesting. But basically, there's a theme of, I guess you could say, even on in a metaphorical stance, that something is dying around the home or family, but that leads to more enjoyment or prosperity or good fortune for you personally. So in general, I think that's kind of a positive thing. Okay, so let's go ahead and put Aquarius rising on the ascendant now. And this is going to be showing us that the eclipse is happening across the third house cusp and moving into the fourth house cusp. And here is Pluto making that square back to the eclipse from the first house. So for Aquarius rising, this is really interesting. The eclipse begins in the third house, a house that was connected to daily rituals, to habits and routines, the mental landscapes that were sort of just kind of locked into our daily habits or routines that we do mentally, but also physically going out in the world. What is it that you do every day that you've really been habitually doing for maybe a long time that is beginning to shift or change? What things in the environment are really going to take a twist in the story? Will you stop going somewhere that you've been going, for years? Will you begin going somewhere that you've never gone before, but you all of a sudden it's like it becomes a new thing? And how does that impact or bring abundance or prosperity potentially to the home or family? That's something that's really interesting. Now, there is this connection with Pluto in the first house. So there, of course, is going to be a theme with Pluto in the first house of personal transformation. I'll give you an example of this. For my 8-year-old son, who is an Aquarius rising, this is the way that I read this eclipse in his life based on, him having the same rising sign. I noticed, what was it, 2 days ago, I think, 2 days ago, out of the blue, my 8-year-old son just got really, really, really into coloring. He wanted us to buy coloring books. He went to the stores and got out old coloring books. He sharpened up all his coloring pencils. And this has been something that has just been really like intense for him over the last couple of days. And it's like, whoa, out of nowhere. And we have always had to almost like color with him or encourage him to sort of try to get him into it. He is a Libra sun with Venus in Libra, Aquarius rising. So, we imagine that all things related to art are going to be appealing to him. So we're like, coloring, right? Of course, coloring. 8-year-old boy, when I was a kid, I loved coloring. But he has never seemed that interested in it. And it's really been almost kind of like, okay, this is a dud. Like, this isn't happening. But over the last couple of days, it's just like, wow, he has really been into this. And, it seems kind of mundane. It's like coloring. But to an 8-year-old, when your world is, when you've only lived 8 years and you're a child, this can be a really intense, big, powerful thing where all of a sudden it's like, I used to do this every day, but now I want to do this. I want to color. And you get the sense that here's this eclipse where the moon is moving into Taurus. Taurus is a Venus ruled sign. It's like there was something artistic that he began doing. And, he sort of cut off a little bit of the ritual, like Mars-like video games. And those sort of got sacrificed and fell by the wayside. Now it's like, I want to do this art at home. And it's interesting because Pluto is moving into his first house. So there are probably beginning to be these very subterranean moods that come through him, sweep through the bowels of the waters of his psyche that are sort of beginning to transform who he is as a person, and then it's like art, some of the artistic qualities are beginning to come out. So I thought that was a really interesting reading for him. So that's how I would read this. Think about the ways in which those everyday environmental things that you do or things that you think about, for some people, maybe this is like writing your memoirs and you need to spend time at home. Maybe a relative comes to visit and moves in. So there could be a different variations for this, but I would read it as things shifting or changing around the everyday environment, maybe potentially having something to do with a relative or old friend and your home and how you are beginning to become something more or different as a person with Pluto in the first here. Okay, last but certainly not least, sorry to all the Pisces rising people here. I just go in order, so I don't mean to make you last all the time because I love Pisces rising. Very beautiful, sweet souls they are. But this is going to move the eclipse that begins in your second house across that second house cusp into the third house. And it's going to have that square back to Pluto in the 12th house. So for me, this is taking some personal money or investing in something and bringing that out into maybe a creative project. One example I have of this is like, let's say this is somebody that decides that they are going to be like, like start a YouTube channel on cooking, and it's like, but you got to buy all the camera stuff and, all the equipment and set it up. But it's like you're taking something that you have, some resource, some money, some equipment, something that you have, maybe some skill or work talent, and you're going to be doing something with that in the day to day. There's going to be a shift or change in doing something with those particular resources. And then here is that square back to Pluto in the 12th. So this could be something that is connected to a theme of transformation around spirituality or beliefs, healing, anything that has that 12th house quality of like sort of trying to come back to yourself as a person, to heal, to deal with these more secretive aspects of ourselves that we don't always see, that we have to sort of try to work on, and that might have a connection to the kind of activity that we're working on day to day. A kind of transformation that we're sort of trying to transmute, I guess you could say, on more of like a deeper psychological level that maybe we're not even aware of that is coming through. I think probably the more surface level to read this is just to think about what you're taking that you own, or a skill that you can, that you do well, that is being utilized in an everyday sense, that maybe shifts things for you in terms of like a project that you're working on creatively, maybe. Also, I wonder, with the third house having to do with siblings, I guess for some Pisces risings, I wonder if the topic of siblings doesn't come up, where, maybe you have to give some money to a sister or something like that to help her out. Okay, so those are my horoscope delineations for all 12 rising signs. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. I hope you got something good out of this. Please leave in the comment section anything that you reflected on based on your rising sign. I'd love to get that interaction, and I'd love to hear you guys' story. And I'll be back again on Friday with some more astrology. So until then, I hope the eclipse treats you well, and be safe, and I'll see you then. Bye for now.